All right, we're back. Hey, apologize everyone, or anyone if anyone's still watching. We had to do a hard reboot on our laptop that we use for broadcasting here, and it had to do some system updates, and so we are starting from scratch at 7:44 a.m. So apologize. Hopefully, those of you who are not able to rejoin live we'll at least get to watch this later. So I'm gonna just kind of recap everything that I talked about that you didn't get to hear, um, and we'll get rolling. So I have with me in studio this morning Jennifer Elliott doing production again, and Libby, and help me with the last name, Wishmeyer. Yes. Okay, Libby Wishmeyer, who is our summer intern, and we aren't too smart here on Ask the Agronomist sometimes. So you got the ugly old agronomist on camera, the two attractive young ladies off camera. Apologize for that. We're going to get Libby on a future episode, hopefully when we don't have to talk so much about what's wrong with the crop. We will get Libby on, and she can introduce herself and talk about her summer. And thanks to both of you for helping out here this morning. We are coming to you live. Knock on wood, we were live once before, then we were dead. From the beautiful Illinois Soybean Association conference facility and offices here in Bloomington Normal, Illinois. And I am here because our sales team is here. They are here because they're doing sales training today, and I need help to pull this off, as you all know. So I traveled to Bloomington this morning because that's where Jennifer was, and she and Libby are going to be stuck here in training the rest of the day. I am going to play the agronomist trump card and say I don't need to do sales training, and I'm going to go look at some drought stress fields the rest of the day. And maybe I'd rather be sales training than looking at drought stress crops. But anyway, so we've alluded to the fact that we're going to talk about the drought. 2 weeks ago on Ask the Agronomist, I said we would talk about the drought in 2 weeks if we still needed to. I was hoping that this thing, first we were abnormally dry, and then it was a flash drought, and I think now it's just a drought, if you ask me. But I was hoping, and we've all been hoping, and the weather forecasters have been claiming that the pattern was going to change, and we would get moisture, and we would be able to grow the crop that we have been expecting to grow since planting season this year. But regretfully, that has not happened yet, and it is scary dry across actually quite a large region of the Corn Belt. The last U.S. drought monitor map that I looked at showed the only, and this would be prior to some of the rain that Southern Illinois and Indiana and other places received a few days ago, but at that time, the only part of the Corn Belt that's relevant as far as corn production goes that wasn't at least abnormally dry was southern Minnesota. The rest of, virtually all of Illinois, all of Iowa, all of Nebraska, all of Indiana, all of Ohio, Missouri, even Minnesota, except for the southern third, which is the best part. But just a lot of dryness, pretty widespread, and just kind of concerning how dry we've been. We're going to look at some data that I pulled out of climate. I'm also going to hopefully do a little demo on how you can do this at home if you want to, comparing the last two famous drought years being 2012 and 88. Actually, technically, I guess 89 would have been the last drought prior to 12, but everybody talks about 88. Even though for a lot of people 89 was actually worse than 88 was. So anyway, we'll talk a little bit about what impact the drought conditions are having on the crop today. Really, the only impact the drought conditions are having on today's crops are just slowing their vegetative growth. Drought prior to tasseling in corn delays reproductive development. So basically, if you're under drought stress before tasseling, it's slowing the crop down. If you're in drought stress after tasseling, it's speeding the crop up. So we are going to flower later. We are going to pollinate later. We are going to mature later because of this drought that we're experiencing. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to necessarily be a late harvest, or we're going to have high moisture corn to harvest, or anything to worry about like that. But it does mean that we're going to be flowering, we're going to be pollinating, later than normal. And because if you've noticed, the crop looks about the same every day as it did the day before. Things are just growing terribly, terribly slow. The later you planted, the lighter your soil, the more struggles your crop had getting roots down, the slower it's growing. If you're looking at the first corn that you planted that's on your best soil, that's rooted down good, that crop looks pretty good. And it's still managing to put on relatively normal growth. Now, it would be growing faster if it rained than it is, but it is still growing. Now, as you get into some of the later planted crops, lighter soils, tougher ground, anything that's having issues with compaction, anything that had a lot of residue to deal with, anything that just struggled to get its roots established, that's a different story. That stuff is really, really, really struggling and not seeing a lot of growth in that. So the other thing we're seeing because of the dry weather are just widespread nutrient deficiencies, especially potassium. Probably some of the worst potassium deficiency I can recall seeing. You always see potassium deficiency. You always see it worse in dry weather. You always see it worse when you've had poor root development. Speaking of poor root development, there is some rootless corn around. So if you've never had the misfortune of seeing rootless corn, that's good. I hope you're not having the misfortune of seeing it this year, but it is one of the sadder things you can see happen to a field of corn, because it goes, in the course of a day or two, when it gets big enough that you recognize that the problem exists, it goes from a field that you were once proud of to now ashamed of, because it doesn't have any roots and it's starting to fall over. And there are, I don't know that it's a significant percentage of the acres out there, but generally speaking, the most common cause of it is if the seed furrow opens back up. Second most common cause would be shallow planting. Both of those are only an issue when it's really dry. So the number one overriding cause of rootless corn is it's too damn dry. We already know that for everybody. But if your seed furrow stayed closed and you planted at a proper depth, you probably had enough moisture to get roots established. And once you get roots established, rootless corn is not going to be an issue. The plant may still struggle, it may still be dry, but its roots are fine. If you get dry before those roots get established, or you lose seed to soil contact by the seed furrow opening back up before those roots get established, that's when you end up with rootless corn. The only fix for rootless corn is rain. A secondary fix, and not really a fix, but it is somewhat helpful. If you can row crop cultivate, and if you can move some loose soil around the base of that plant to kind of bury that crown, cover that plant up, kind of help support it a little bit by mounding that dry soil around that plant. That's not really an immediate benefit, other than it does at least get the roots out of the sunlight and get them covered with soil. Until you get moisture, piling that dry soil around the base of that plant is not going to help it that much. But when the moisture does come, having the soil piled around the plant will be a benefit to it and make it recover faster. Now, if your soil is so hard because it's so dry that all your cultivator's doing is sliding across the top of the ground, or you're pulling up big chunks that are, knocking plants over, and, that's not particularly helpful. So it needs to work up relatively decent with a cultivator to make that worth your time. But that is really the only thing. If you're desperate I'm going to do everything I can do to try to save my field, a good cultivation is the best thing, really the only thing you can do. And then, like the rest of us, pray for rain. So I'm going to try to show a few pictures here. Apologize, I should have had this fired up, of some of these nutrient deficiencies we're seeing. And I want to illustrate something, particularly in soybeans. We've been talking primarily about corn here, but I really got some good potassium deficiency symptoms in soybean pictures here just the other day, if I can find the ones I'm looking for. Okay, so here would be a good one. So if you can see that well enough, can you tell that the center part of the plant, the upper leaves, the youngest leaves, are pretty green? Hopefully you can see that in that picture. The oldest leaves are the ones that are showing the deficiency symptoms. That's what you're going to see from potassium in both corn and soybeans. Potassium is a mobile nutrient in the soil and in the plant. Mobile nutrients will show their deficiency symptoms on the oldest leaves, because when the plant is unable to access all the potassium or all the nutrient it needs, it will sacrifice the older leaves to keep the new ones growing. So it has the ability to pull potassium out of the old leaves, send them to the new. I'm going to contrast that picture with a different looking soybean picture. If I can get to the one that I want. And that would be here. So on those plants, it tends to be the youngest leaves that are showing the deficiency symptom. And if you look down in the soybean canopy, you can see the older leaves, are relatively green. I'm going to try to pull up another one here to see if it shows it any better. That might show it a little bit better. So those plants are kind of the inverse of the ones we were just looking at. The older leaves are still relatively green. The youngest leaves are the ones that are showing all the yellowing, all the chlorosis, the green veins. So that is not potassium, because it's on the wrong part of the plant to be potassium. So that's one of probably three things. It's either a micronutrient, which iron or manganese would be the most common two things that will make a soybean plant look like that. It could be carryover of HPPD corn herbicide from last year, which is showing up because of the dryness again. So every problem anybody's talking about is actually because it's too damn dry is the reason the problem is there. But there are some extenuating circumstances. So if you used a high rate of a persistent HPPD corn herbicide last year, and on lighter ground and in overlap areas and kind of, wavy patterns, not uniform across the field, you've got pale, stunted, yellow, maybe whitish colored soybean leaves. That could potentially be some herbicide carryover. Really, all those beans need to grow through that is the same thing that everything else needs, and that's just some moisture. I don't know that there will be any long-term yield impact to that, but it is making some fields look kind of tough in areas. I think I've got, if I can find it here quickly, I think I've got some good corn potash deficiency pictures. So here would be one. So corn shows deficiency symptoms probably more strikingly than soybeans do. It stunts the growth as well when it's really bad. So I'm getting a glare on that screen, so you might not be able to see that as good as I had hoped. But again, it's the lower leaves, and that's not nitrogen. If it was nitrogen, it would be on the lower leaves, and it would be the opposite of that. Nitrogen is going to be yellowing on the midrib in the middle of the leaf, and the outside edges of the leaf will stay green. Potassium is just the opposite. So the edges of the lower leaves turn yellow, and then if it's bad enough, turns brown, and if it's bad enough, the plant turns into a dwarf plant, and it's very stunted. The internodes are shortened, and it just looks like a little corn bush with some funny-looking leaves on it, rather than a normal plant. Extremely common to see this along the edges of virtually every cornfield, especially if people mow their road ditches like a yard. If you never mow your roadsides, you're not going to see this as often, because the grass, if left unmowed, does not mine the edge of the field for potassium as much as it does as if you mow it frequently. The reason these field edges are showing up so bad is we never get a full rate of fertilizer clear to the edge of the field. To get a full rate of fertilizer out of a spreader truck to the edge of the field, you would have to be okay spreading fertilizer to the opposite road ditch across the road. And if your fertilizer applicator was fertilizing the road, you might get frustrated with them for wasting fertilizer. But when you're running a spreader truck and your spread pattern goes to the edge of the field, you're only getting about a 10% rate out there in those last few feet. So the edge of a lot of fields probably has less potassium than it needs, and then you combine that with these drought conditions, and you get a lot of deficiency symptoms showing up. So, what's going on with yield potential for corn right now? So we are through the girth determination phase in corn, and we are currently smack dab in the middle of ear length determination. So you may think, well, gosh, am I going to end up with a bunch of short, stumpy little ears because it's so dry out? Potentially, if it gets dry enough, yes. But in most cases, if your corn plants still look good in the morning, and this is a pretty good general rule to follow, no matter how horrible they look at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a hot, sunny day, no matter how slowly it's growing, no matter how much better you wished it would look, if it still looks good at 7, 8, 9, 10 in the morning, there's really no damage that's being done. It's slow. Its growth has been slowed, which is good, because slowing down now is buying time waiting for that rain. You wouldn't want it speeding up to try to get done as quick as it can, because with every passing day, it's getting closer to the critical stage of its life where we're really going to need moisture. So if you're going to stress a crop with dryness, right now is the best time to do it. If we'd gotten this dry a month earlier, everybody would have had rootless corn. We would have had a lot of seeds laying in dry dirt. We'd have had emergence problems. We got the crop up, we got it started, and in most cases, it was able to root down before it got dry. So that's a blessing. Until we get closer to pollination, it's really, really difficult to ruin the yield of your crop. Can you detract from the theoretical top end potential that, if you thought your corn was going to make 611 bushel this year, it no longer has that much potential. It might be down to 550 potential now because of the stress that we've had. We are deducting potential yield from that theoretical top end yield that honestly none of us are going to get to anyway. There's going to be something happen later in the season, either pollination problem, grain fill problem, some sort of issue, disease issues late. Something will limit yield more than this early season drought has limited it to this point. Now, that assumes that the drought stops at some point and we start getting moisture. So drought could absolutely end up being the yield limiting thing that we deal with this year, but it's not there yet. That's coming, unfortunately, if this pattern doesn't change. And I'm going to show some weather data here in a minute to kind of illustrate how this year compares to a couple famous drought years in the past. So before we get into that, I want to touch a little bit on weed control issues. So the other thing that we're going to be up against is, just like your crop is not actively growing, just like your crop is stressed, just like you are stressed, your weeds are stressed as well. And you've probably heard somebody over the years say that for good weed control, you need to have actively growing weeds. We don't have any actively growing weeds. We have surviving weeds right now. And killing a surviving weed is a lot more difficult than killing an actively growing weed. And there's been a lot of uncertainty over the past few weeks of, should I wait for a rain before I try to control my weeds? Should I drag my feet on making that application? Should I have already done it 3 weeks ago? What should I do? And I would say, just as a general rule, waiting to do weed control is almost always the wrong decision. We haven't gotten moisture, so all that's happened is the weed has gotten bigger and even more stressed while you've been waiting for a rain. So if your approach to weed control was to wait till it rains and then hit stuff right after that refreshing rain that has never come, I'd bail out on that strategy, and I'd just get the field sprayed and I'd hope for the best. And you're probably not going to kill everything. Hopefully you kill enough that you can live with it. I don't really want to be coming back making late applications all summer long trying to kill the weeds that we missed the first time. I would honestly rather live with the weeds we missed the first time and take this as a learning opportunity to what we want to change for next year. So Maybe we need a better pre next year. Maybe you need an earlier post-emergence application. Maybe you need to add an additional effective mode of action. Maybe you need to recognize that there's more places we could spray dicamba than we are currently. I don't know what's right for your operation, but this is going to be a very challenging weed control summer as well. Now, the dry weather is preventing weed growth, so you may have a lesser population of weeds just because it's too dry for them to grow as well. But you're going to see things like wheel tracks. You're going to see, you know how dusty these fields are. If you watch a sprayer going through the field and you can't even see the sprayer because of the dust it's kicking up, wherever that big plume of dust is going, dust will deactivate virtually any herbicide. So, that's a real challenging situation. So we can overcome some of these things with rate. We can overcome some of these things with adjuvants. We can overcome some of these things with spray volume. We can probably do a little better job if we spray early of a day before the weed is completely stressed out in the middle of the afternoon. So there are things you can do to improve your odds of success. But unfortunately, when you've got big drought stressed weeds, that is like the toughest thing to kill. So, there really isn't any herbicide that's good at killing a big drought stressed weed. The better a product is at controlling a particular species, probably the better it will do at controlling them when they're drought stressed. But nothing works, even if we went back to the good old days of Roundup before glyphosate resistance was really talked about. It was hard to kill drought stress weeds with Roundup too, even in the good old days when you could kill everything with Roundup. So just keep in mind that a lot of potential weed control issues just due to drought stress, and honestly, there may not be any fixing some of those problems without making, off-label applications or late applications or applications that have the potential to do damage to the crop. I've already had my retail applicator ask me what I'm going to do with the water hemp we missed. My answer was, I'm running them through the combine is what I'm doing with the water hemp that I missed. So unless it's really, really, really bad, I'm not sure I'd throw good money after bad trying to clean up stuff that you missed the first time, because it's going to be harder to kill the second time than it was the first time. It's going to be bigger. It's going to be older. It's more stressed. It's been damaged by the first application. It's really, really difficult to take a weed like that out. So before you just assume that, we need to retreat this field, talk to your herbicide experts and make sure that what you're spending money on or what you're asking your supplier to spend money on is actually going to do something. So any questions, Jen?
Yes.
You look poised to ask me something. So
we have a really great question from a great source.
Awesome.
Chris Callowell, our junior agronomist.
What? I thought it was some customer.
No, just Callowell. So I think he's trying to he's not asking a question. He'd like you to reiterate a point.
Yes.
Or dig into something here. So he's wondering if you can discuss why his corn is rolling, even though there's some cooler days in here.
Yeah. Okay. So there's been a lot of people making themselves feel better because it's been cool. And as a stocky lad, I appreciate the coolness, the low humidity. It's been a comfortable drought. We need humidity for this crop. We need humidity to kick off some rains, but as a rotund guy that sweats a lot, the low humidity conditions have been nice. It's like living in the desert. It gets down to like 47 at night, and it's 90 during the day. But Chris's question about how much is temperature helping this crop because it's cool. And we talk a lot about low nighttime temperatures benefiting corn and high nighttime temperatures hurting corn. That's a little more kind of a grain fill conversation that we're typically having. We're usually worried about nighttime temperatures in August taking yield away. And last year we had some very good grain fill conditions, and we added a lot of yield with a slow, relatively cool, very healthy plant, good moisture grain fill period last year. And that was partly why we had that great crop. And corn rolls primarily due to lack of moisture. not because it's hot. So if it's dry enough, your corn could roll when it's 60 degrees. And when it gets really, really dry, and a lot of Illinois producers, may have never even seen it this dry to see this. When it's dry enough, your corn will be blue and rolled up and look like pineapple at 8 in the morning. And if you've never seen that, that's good. I hope you never do see that. But that's when the plant is completely unable to conserve enough moisture to not roll up. And it doesn't really roll because of temperature as much as it does because of moisture. And so, you can have corn rolling when it's 100 degrees. You can have corn rolling when it's 80 degrees. You can have corn rolling at 8 in the morning. You can have corn that doesn't roll until the heat of the day in the middle of the afternoon. What the temperature does is the temperature makes the plant use even more moisture to cool itself. So the warmer it gets, the more moisture it takes to keep it from rolling. But the temperature is actually not what's making it roll. It's the lack of moisture or the lack of the ability of the plant to take up enough moisture to meet its transpiration needs and cool itself and keep the plant functioning. So look at rolling as a function of drought more than a function of temperature. And really what our moderate temperatures have done is it has slowed the growth of the crop even more, buying us more time to get a saving rain before it gets to the really critical stage, which is closer to pollination. So the fact that we've been cool is helpful. We are not transpiring as much moisture as we would be if it was hot. We are not stressing those plants as much as we would be if it was hot. And the plants are not growing as fast as they would be if it was hotter. All those things are positive. Now, being cool ain't going to save us. We will, whether you have a cool drought or a hot drought, if the drought remains, you're going to end up in about the same spot. So it's, I told Chris last night, and I'll show this data here in a minute that I keep alluding to. I'm still confident we're going to get moisture. I'm still confident we're going to raise a crop because we always do. But I mean, the reality is there's a lot of acres of corn that if it doesn't rain a significant amount in the next 30 days, will be sub 100 bushel yields. And there's some stuff that looks damn good today that it can't get through the summer without a lot of moisture. I was talking with a producer the other night, and he said it feels later in the year than it really is. He says it feels like it ought to be the middle of July, and it's only the middle of June. And we were talking about how often do we get through pollination, and it's dry, but we get the crop pollinated, and then we catch a couple timely rains during grain fill. And with a minimal amount of rain, we end up with an unbelievable crop, and we get lots of praise from our customers. Oh, these genetics are awesome, and the things you guys have done with breeding, and this crop can handle stress so much better than it did in 1988 and other famous drought years from the past. And that's all true, but it's still got to rain. You still need moisture. And this producer, I told him I was going to give him credit when I use this on Ask the Agronomist. He said, well, this year we didn't get through pollination. We got through germination. And that's a pretty accurate statement. We had enough moisture in the soil. We had a lot of rain in February and March. And that is one of the biggest differences between this drought and 12 and 88, which were dry all the way through the late winter and early spring. And I'll show that in this data that I've got here in a minute. But once we got to planting from April through May and into June, this year's actually been drier in some parts of the state than 88 and 12 were, which is kind of freaky to people to think about that. But we had good subsoil moisture. We still do have subsoil moisture. So that crop that's rooted down into that deeper subsoil still looks good. And that's the reason it looks good. The stuff that looks like hell is either late planted, hard soil, heavy residue, got off to a slower start. It doesn't have a good root system down into that deeper moisture. And if you're living off the top foot, that's a hard life. If you're living off the top 3 foot, life's not too bad. And it's because of that good subsoil moisture that we had going into the season, and stuff went in the ground good. We didn't mud anything in, so we had good opportunities to grow roots, especially that early planted stuff. And we had a lot of debates earlier in the season about, should we be planting, should we be waiting? Right now it looks like nobody should have waited for a damn thing. You should have planted every day starting about the 1st of April, that it was dry enough for you to be in the field planting, because the crop that's got the most potential today is the first stuff that went in the ground. Now, if it doesn't start raining soon, it's not going to be much better than the last stuff that went in the ground. They're both going to be horrible. But that stuff that is rooted down is still growing, still progressing. The stuff that's not rooted down due to either late planting, compacted soil, issues of some sort, that's the stuff that's really struggling. So another question.
We've got a really interesting question here. So you talk about the differences of this year compared to those years in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Well, something else that's different about this year that wasn't going on that time was the smoke and haze from Canada.
Okay.
So Pete's got the question here of how that smoke is going to affect yields potentially, because they are, in his words here, predicting that it may carry on for the next couple of months. So what effect will that haze have on our yields?
Yeah. So, right now, to me, it would be an insignificant factor compared to the dryness. Sunlight is key to driving photosynthesis. Water drives photosynthesis more than sunlight does. So, it doesn't matter how good a light quality you've got. If your plant's drought stressed, it's not going to end well. So the haziness is going to, potentially lower the temperature. Solar radiation it's very, very, very rare for a lack of solar radiation to be a yield limiting factor. And it would certainly never be a yield limiting factor in a year where we have other larger yield limiting factors, such as dry weather. Now, if everything was perfect, if you had 38,000 plants and you had ample moisture and you had perfect fertility and you had a really good root system and you were hitting it out of the park, everything was ideal, that's the scenario where maybe some poor sunlight days could impact yield. We're a long way from that with what we're dealing with from an environmental standpoint. So I think for the sunlight to become an important factor, our weather's going to have to change dramatically, because right now the thing that's going to limit our yield is it's just too damn dry. And I don't think I'd probably be too worried about the light quality now. In 21, we had the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
We had our own fires in 21 that were in the upper plains here in the States. And we had a lot of hazy, smoggy days with moisture and humidity. And that really helped tar spot thrive, because tar spot likes low light conditions. So you think, oh gosh, am I going to have tar spot again because it's cloudy? Well, not unless it rains a lot in a hurry, because the thing that tar spot needs more than low light is it needs moisture. And if you think it's hard for a corn plant to survive out there, try being a tar spot spore. Those guys are screwed because it's just too dry. What tar spot needs to get kicked off in central Illinois is it needs a lush, dense canopy. It prefers cooler weather. It requires high humidity, and it also likes it dark. That's part of the reason it's a lower canopy disease. So we've got, some of those factors. So it's hazy, it's cloudy. We're not having bright sunny days. It's not terribly hot. We've had a lot of cool nights. And so you've got a couple factors there that are pro tar spot. But the one factor you're missing, which is 95% of the problem as far as driving tar spot, is moisture. And we saw this clearly last year in the growing season of 22. The only place we found significant tar spot were in some pockets that had a wet June. One of those was in Jennifer's territory, actually. And And actually, Carlisle was one of the first people to see tar spot last year, even though, he's more of a central south guy. And we think of tar spot as being a northern disease. Well, his territory had a couple pockets that caught a couple 3-inch rains in June and created the right environment. The other place where you're going to see the right environment is irrigated ground. So the guys that have irrigation are using the hell out of it for good reason, because they need the moisture. And we're gonna grow some good tar spot on irrigated cornfields. So this could be one of those years where the circle that's getting the water has horrible tar spot infection, and the non-irrigated corner that's burning up from drought, it's got its own issues, but there's no tar spot there. So I've seen some pretty funky pictures where you've got a brown circle with little green triangles around the brown circle in the corners of the field, just as an indication of how important moisture is to getting tar spot going. And we haven't had enough moisture to even let tar spot survive. So if we go through the rest of June as dry as we've been, the odds of us having enough tar spot to matter are pretty close to zero, in my opinion. That doesn't mean we can ignore it, because I hope the weather pattern changes. I hope we get really wet, really soon. And we're going to need that to grow a good corn crop. And that could also kick off some tar spot. I'm sure we'll have it by harvest. I think we'll always have it by harvest every year. But if you're going through a hot, dry June, which is what most people had last year, and it's what everybody's had this year to this point, it's going to be difficult for tar spot to really become a factor.
So outside of those irrigated acres, would your fungicide application recommendations change given the season?
So one of my last topics I was going to touch on was, what do we do about fungicides? And, I never like to give up on a corn crop. There's a famous person in Central Illinois that was well known for that saying, and I subscribe to that theory. So I'm still on my plan of treating this crop right with a tassel time fungicide application, assuming that I'm still confident that I've got APH levels or above yield potential at that time. I'll tell you a little story on myself from 2012. In 2012, we were looking at corn that, late into June, into early July, it was dry. We knew if it didn't rain, it was going to be bad, but the potential was still there for that crop to be good. And so I made the decision to invest in a fungicide. I believe in the practice. I think it's a good practice. I believe in the stress relieving properties of strobilurin fungicides. I knew it didn't have heavy disease pressure, but you don't have to have heavy disease pressure to still benefit from a fungicide. So I went ahead and made that application. My corn in 2012 made 89 bushel. So all I did with my fungicide application was save the government some money on my crop insurance claim. So that turned out to be a really bad decision on my part. So, I love fungicides. I love protecting the crop. I love making the crop all it can be. But if the weather is going to make it impossible for your crop to be above your APH of your crop insurance, the only benefit to a fungicide is potentially going to be improving standability. It does maybe prop up your APH a little bit if you add a few bushels to your corn crop. But if you are so pessimistic about your corn yields by that time that you don't think you can beat your APH, I would get more conservative at that point as far as making fungicide applications. I really, really, really hope that is not a conversation that we are having 3 weeks from now, because we've had 4 or 5 inches of rain and things look awesome, and we are now optimistic that, hey, we're good to go on making a crop out of this. But my 10-day forecast has got nothing in it. I'm setting at my June total right now at home 17 hundredths, 1.7 tenths, not 1.7 inches, 1.7 tenths is what I've had for the month of June. And the next 10 days, 0 is what my forecast says right now. So, I won't be pollinating yet then. Most people won't be pollinating yet then. It's going to be July before we're into pollination. Even if you planted super early, we're not going to be tasseling before the 4th of July in most cases. And it could be more like mid-July when we're tasseling. So, we need rain. We need rain badly. If we get rain in the next 2 to 3 weeks, this crop could still amaze you. If we have to wait a month or longer to get rain, it's going to be difficult for this crop to amaze you. It may be amazing because it makes 80 instead of 0, but there ain't nothing amazing about 80 bushel corn. So hopefully we can turn this weather pattern around. I don't know what's going to take to do that. Some of the forecasters have been forecasting a change in the pattern. Originally late May was going to be wet, and then early June was going to be wet, and then mid-June was going to be wet. And now I don't know when they say it's going to be wet, but we just keep pushing back that shift that we need to see. So while we're on the subject of depressing things, I want to show you, and I've illustrated this before, but for those of you that don't remember, it is a little tricky to get to the historical weather data in climate. So what I'm going to show you here is you need to go to the climate.com app online. So don't you can do it on your phone, you can do it on your iPad. It's actually easier to do on your computer, but go to climate.com and get into your account that's going to look like that with all of your fields listed. And then you pick a field. I'm going to pick what I call big field, which is at my house. There's 2 fields there. One's big, one's little. So that's why it's big field. And so you pull that up. So when you pull up, in this case, there's my big field. And you scroll down on this side where all of your imagery is. And you just keep scrolling, and you'll come to a little tab that says weather. That's the tricky part. If you don't know where to look for that tab, it's damn hard to find it. When you hit that tab that says weather, it pulls up the weather for that field. And then you have to go to up here where it says past weather. And you hit past weather. Then you get into this really cool screen here where you can select the dates you want to see your past weather. I don't know how far back this goes, but it goes back at least 1988 because I pulled up my weather from 1988 last night. And obviously climate didn't exist in 1988. My fields were not in climate in 1988. You might not have even signed up for climate yet. But if you do that today and put your fields in, your weather data from 1988 will be in climate and available to you within about 24 hours. Pretty cool. So if you go in here, you can select the dates. And so you can put in any date you want. And to generate the data that I'm going to show you here, I looked at my seasonal totals for 3 years, 88, 12, and 23. And this is where I got them from. So if you're tired of looking at corn and you want to sit in the air conditioning in your office and look through your historical weather data and climate, you can sign up today and do that. But anyway, here's what I got when I did that. So first thing I looked at was the total amount of rain received in those 3 seasons to date. So I went from January 1 to today. So 2023, we've had 12.7 inches at my house since the 1st of January. That makes you feel kind of good compared to 12 and 88, which were only 9.4 and 9.8. That's really damn dry. That's ridiculously dry. Now, the main difference between these 3 years, if you notice, is in that January to March total. So we got a lot of rain this spring in February and March because of our warm winter. And we got all that rain soaked in because we didn't have a lot of frost in the ground. And if you're wondering how in the hell does this crop look as good as it looks with how little rain we've had in May and June, that's why. There was good moisture down in the subsoil. We didn't have that in 12 and 88. We got dry much earlier in 2012 and in 88 than we did in 23. Now, the scary part is if you start sliding across there and you start looking at May totals, I've had less rain this May than we did in 12, a lot less than 12, even less than I did in 88. And in June of 88, we managed to get a whopping 8/10. So I got to get 6 more tenths to get up to my total from 88. And in 12, we actually had 1.9 inches of rain in June. Now, July is what ruined the corn crop in 88 and 2012. 4/10 and 5/10. You can't raise corn on 4/10 and 5/10 in July, especially when you had no subsoil moisture and you'd been dry all spring. Soybeans fared better in those 2 years because actually by August we got in 12. August was wet. 4.3. That's an above average August. 2.9 was not in 88. So 88 was just dry all year. It just really never stopped. So, it's challenging to look at these numbers because if this doesn't change quickly, this year could be every bit as bad as those other two. Now, if you've been in an area where you've caught more rain, that's good. But on our farm at home, I still have the potential to raise a worse crop than I did in 12 or 88 if this pattern doesn't change. So not to be a downer today, but just to be a realist, the market is starting to recognize that the odds of us getting enough rain and timely rain for the next 12 weeks, it's got to rain once before it rains 10 times. And I don't know. To me, it's just not very damn likely that we're going to get all the rain we need when we want it over the next 12 weeks, considering the pattern we've been in the previous, several months. I get frustrated with my phone weather app. I won't name any names. They all do the same thing. I'd like somebody to explain to me why it's different every time I look at it. The weather hasn't changed for like months where it's dry. One time I look at it, I got 4 days in my 10-day forecast that each have a 40% chance of rain. The next time I look at it, there's nothing in the 4-day forecast. There was one day I looked at it, I had a 70% chance on Sunday. Even had a lightning bolt in it. So it's nice to see that lightning bolt because that means it might be a bigger rain. But then you look at the predicted rainfall amount that it's showing in there, said 1,500s. That's not much of a thunderstorm with a 70% chance of rain if it's only saying I'm going to get 1,500ths of moisture. And when I looked this morning, I think Sunday was down to 30% chance of rain and like 500ths or something like that. So, we need. I'd like to see 2 to 3 inches before the end of June. I'd like to see 4 to 5 in July, and I'd like to see 3 to 4 in August. If we pull that rabbit out of a hat, this is a top 5 corn crop. What are the odds we're going to get anywhere near that much rain between now and the end of August? I don't know. We could get by with less if it's spaced perfectly. We could get by with less if we had good subsoil moisture, which we no longer do because we've used all that up to get to this point. So we've lost our cushion, and it's just a matter of how much we're going to get through the growing season. If you could get timely rains when you need them, that's always better than getting extra. But you can't make it rain, and you can't control when you get it, and sometimes it's just tough to get it when you need it. And, we're blessed with soils here in central Illinois that can store upwards of 10 inches of rainfall. And we've utilized that to get to this point. If you go to Mason County and you look at non-irrigated sand that can store about half an inch of rainfall, that's what your crop would look like if we didn't have soil that has the ability to hold water. And certain parts of the country, they don't have that luxury. And generally they have irrigators setting there because they're going to need it. And this is going to be one of those years where guys they're going to get a good ROI out of that irrigation pivot they've got setting there. if they have the ability to use that. So question, Jennifer?
Yes, there was a question, and there is a recognition this might be more of a meteorologist question.
Okay.
Maybe you've got that hat on. You never know.
I dislike meteorologists, so we'll give her a go.
But Ryan Richards wants to know if you know what the technical weather pattern did we have in 88 and 2012? So what was that recognized or called?
So, I'm dangerous even commenting on this, but I have heard a forecaster that's well known, well respected, that did compare and contrast the big global weather patterns of those years, and they're not the same at all. So I would say this feels a lot like 88 and 12, just based on the fact that it's dry. But if you look at El Nino, La Nina, air currents, ocean currents, you look at the global weather like those guys do, totally different.
Yeah.
Now, for whatever reason, so far the end result has been the same. It's not raining. So as an agronomist, I would say I see a lot of similarities between 88 and 12 and 23. But if you look at the big picture global weather patterns, those guys say that this is totally different. Now, obviously, with totally different patterns, you can ironically end up maybe with the same result. But from a meteorology standpoint, this year doesn't look anything like previous drought years, is what I've heard those guys talk about. So let's touch on a couple other dry weather situations. So spider mites, which always rear their head when we have dry weather. So spider mites they're always around, but they are favored by dry weather conditions. They reproduce faster when it's hot and dry. They do better when it's hot and dry, and the crop obviously cannot handle the stress that they create as well when it's hot and dry. So normally we're not even talking about spider mites until August. This is June. So I don't know if we've ever had spider mites that needed treated this early or not. I haven't personally been made aware of any fields that needed treated for spider mites yet, but they can affect both corn and soybeans. They're generally thought of as a soybean pest, but I've seen corn that probably should have been sprayed for mites as well. And if you do think you need to treat for mites, always remember that they are a mite. That's why it's called spider mites, not spider insects. Mites and insects are different. Insecticides kill insects, not mites. So miticides kill mites. There are some insecticides that are also miticides, about 2. So bifenthrin is a very common active ingredient that's in a lot of good insecticide products. It has activity on mites, and dimethoate, which is probably older than me, also has activity on mites. Chlorpyrifos, which we lost sadly from the marketplace a few years ago, was the other product that we often use for spider mite control. So just be aware that the pyrethroid that you love to throw in with your fungicide on soybeans and corn, for that matter, sometimes is not a miticide. Not going to do anything to mites. So you need a product that will control mites. Now, the product that will control mites will also have some of the, anything that kills mites is going to kill some insects as well. But a lot of things that kill insects will not kill mites. So whatever you use for your spider mite control is potentially also going to control some other insects as well. We never recommend a prophylactic treatment for mites because the mites have the ability to reproduce faster than the beneficial insects that prey on mites do. And because a mite is harder to kill than an insect, any miticide is a pretty highly active insecticide. And so you're going to control all the beneficial insects that might be keeping your mite population down while you're controlling spider mites. So you can actually, if you pull the trigger a little too soon, you can increase your odds that you're going to have to do it again because the mite population is going to rebound faster than the general insect population does. So for that reason, we don't necessarily want to be preventatively treating for spider mites, because that's probably just going to increase your odds of having to treat again. But we need to keep an eye on things. And I would say the smaller plants are, the easier it would be for mites to reach a critical threshold, because those small plants aren't going to be able to handle as heavy a load of mites as a bigger plant would have. The other thing to factor in too is when we're in August, typically August is a pretty critical month for soybean yield. June is not a critical month for soybean yield. We've talked a lot about corn here today and the impact that the drought is having on corn. The impact it's having today on soybeans is very similar. It's having no yield impact. It is impacting vegetative growth. I have April planted 15-inch row no-till soybeans and heavy corn stalk residue that are no more than 3 inches tall today. Sad. Hard to look at. I don't think they will be above the corn stalks before the 4th of July. But that doesn't mean that they can't still produce a lot of blooms and a lot of pods and set a lot of seeds in July and August and early September. So we are even further from knowing what the soybean crop's going to be than we are from knowing what the corn crop's going to be. So, those drought years of 88 and 12, you might not remember what your soybeans made those years. They probably weren't great, but the soybean number doesn't stick in your head like the corn number does, because the soybean number was closer to normal than the corn number. And part of that is because in both of those years, we got quite a bit of rain in August, especially in 12. There were some beans in 12 that were actually pretty good, because early September was wet in 12 also. So we've got a lot of time to make something of the bean crop. We've got less time to make something of the corn crop. And hopefully, fingers crossed that my 10-day forecast is just flat wrong, and it's going to give us a significant amount of moisture here at some point soon. So, any other questions, Jen, on the chat?
I think that gets us for this week.
All right, so we are approaching an hour on the second edition of today's Ask the Agronomist, which means we're way over time. So thank you for those who joined. Thank you for the questions. I'll even thank Kal for sending in a question. And if I didn't do a good job answering his question, he can tell me about that later. So appreciate all of you watching, and we'll just keep hoping for moisture. And we'll be back in 2 weeks, which is when, Jen?
June 29th.
So June 29th. So we'll be really getting close to pollination. So I'm going to say the same thing I said 2 weeks ago. I hope to hell we're not talking about how dry it is on June 29th. If we are, people will be in full-blown panic mode at that point, and it will be interesting to see where the grain markets are at and how they're reacting to that. And but we'll be back with you June 29th. Don't know where we'll be on that day. If we'll be back in Macomb or at an undisclosed location. Maybe that'll be the chance for Libby to shine on Ask the Agronomist. Who knows? We'll figure that out over the next couple of weeks. Everybody stay safe, be well, and talk to you soon.